Welcome back, Westworld fans. We are at the penultimate episode of season 4, episode 7, entitled Metanoia. A lot has happened in this episode, and like the previous episodes, this title has, I wouldn't say hidden meaning, but deeper meaning that pretty much sets the tone for the entire episode. So let's go first there. What does metanoia mean? By definition, it essentially means that you make a significant change in your life due to some type of repentance or some type of spiritual awakening or spiritual conversion, not necessarily to a religion, but just a spiritual conversion or change in your way of thinking. And we see that throughout the episodes with our main characters. This episode places heavy emphasis on Dolores, Bernard, and also even Charlotte. And number one on the list would be the man in black, William. I would say he has probably the biggest uh, or heaviest scene in the entire episode. But let's start at the beginning because, as always, every single week, there's a lot to uncover. So we begin with Bernard. Bernard and Maeve, they're back together, they're reunited, and much like we saw with Caleb and Maeve earlier in the season, we see Bernard and Maeve on a mission. And where they're at is the dam that we saw in the first episode that William took over from the cartel. So we know this is big business right out the gate, that they're at the basically the epicenter of Charlotte's power, essentially. And we find out that this dam, this hydroelectric super farm, is what Bernard calls it. It's used to power the Sublime, and that's what's keeping it running. However, Charlotte does not have a way to get in there because it's in Bernard's mind. He gets in there, or doesn't get in it, he does open it. And he's telling Maeve as far as, how they can take down Charlotte, what they need to do. And he mentions to her that you'll be able to see your child back in the Sublime. But, are you going to be willing to stay here and fight before you do that? He essentially doesn't trust her to do that. And we find out that this is really another simulation that Bernard is running through his mind, where this is our first glimpse of all the scenarios that he's seen as far as people dying and the world failing. We're seeing how the scenarios have run through his mind, each and every one. And in this scenario, Maeve chooses to abandon him in order to go to the sublime with her child. So essentially abandoning humanity and her fellow hosts just to reunite with her family. At this point, we see Bernard transported back into the Sublime where he was earlier. I believe that was episode 3. And essentially, he's back with that uh, godlike being asking him, have you ran another scenario? Do you see how this turns out? Bernard says he does, but he still, and he says this, throughout the episode, he still sees a path. He still sees a way to prevent annihilation. So we get a replay of this scene again, but there's something that happens, and I feel this is going to be very important to the last episode next week, which will be episode 8. The same scenario runs by. He's talking with Maeve. They run the same path. He gives her the gun. They're running through the same scenarios as they go inside the dam, but there's one difference. This time he places something behind or next to a wall, and we don't see what it is. I'm assuming it's some type of bomb, maybe that's going to blow up the dam, but we don't know to be sure. But I feel like it's something that's going to turn the tide as far as what we're going to see in the last episode. So just keep that in mind. I'd love to hear your theories on what you think that is. I think it's some type of bomb, especially where he placed it. He didn't place it when they went inside. He did it behind Maeve's back, number one, and he did it on the outside wall of the structure, which to me means it has to be some type of detonation device. But those scenarios run through. We get two different ones. We get the first one where Maeve essentially abandons him, and then we get the second one where that doesn't happen. She's willing to sit and fight, and she just asks for one thing. Just make a promise to me after we win this war that you will reunite me with my daughter. So essentially, Maeve is telling him that she's willing to see this through to the end. She just wants to be able to have some hope or light at the end of the tunnel. And she says something that I think is very important when we go back to that Metanoia title, is that when Bernard is like questioning her about whether you'll stay and fight, this world is probably going to end. Are you still willing to you know, fight on just that sense of hope. She tells him, Bernard, for someone that plays God and expects us to have so much faith in you and everything that you know as far as the future, you have very little in us. And why is that? I feel it's just because, as a host, everything with them is probabilities and scenarios. They can't think of anything outside of that. Even as evolved as Bernard is, he still has that host nature that defines him. So that kind of spontaneity that we've seen throughout the season that differentiates human beings from hosts, being able to have that spontaneity of thought and independent action, he still, it's hard for him to kind of grasp that with human beings. And it's funny that we're hearing Maeve say that because she's an evolved host. So you would think she would understand more so where he's coming from. But she spent so much time with human beings and with Caleb, she has more human nature, I believe, than any of the other hosts, including Dolores. So that leads back to the metanoia tile as far as Bernard goes. I think he's having to make peace with trusting human beings and trusting that our nature will help see the path that he thinks is going to save everyone, or at least leave a sliver of hope in the world to come. So Bernard, he's, he's still, I think, holding a lot to the vest as far as we don't know all that's going on. We still have to wait to the last episode to figure out what the ending uh scenario is where he has hope that we're going to survive. I don't see what that is, but I feel like something with that dam and what he left is going to lead to that. I don't know if that explosion would lead to the sublime, I guess, bleeding out into the real world, quote unquote. Maybe that's the glimmer of hope that he's talking about. But we'll have to wait and see next episode. But unfortunately, with Bernard, staying with his storyline, he only lets Stubbs know what the potential outcome would be, and he only does that because Stubbs can tell from his demeanor with him that he's probably going to die. And Stubbs asks him point blank, I don't make it, do I? And he says no. But he does mention one thing to him. He says, make sure you go left at the fork. And I don't know if that's a double meaning where he's telling him that just so he can survive a little bit longer, or is he telling him that because this will actually let Stubbs make it to the end? We just don't know because there's so many scenarios that have gone through Bernard's mind that we have no idea what this path will be. But we do know by him telling him that Stubbs does make it to the end of the episode. Him and Frankie are able to break through, save Caleb, and at the end, they're running away from the riot that goes on that we'll talk about later. So at least he told them enough to get through this particular episode, but we have one more. And because it's looking like it's going to be a showdown with, the man in black, the odds of Stubbs surviving are very low. That's one other big theme that we've seen in this episode. Now going to well, before going to Charlotte, let's stick with Bernard and what happened at the end. Essentially, he gets to the tower. He doesn't get the chance to destroy the tower, which is what we believe his mission to be, because he's interrupted by William, who comes up to him and says, I'm surprised you haven't destroyed the tower yet. And he shoots down Bernard. But while this is going on, we're still getting the flashbacks of Bernard saying, I know the path I have to take. I know I have to die, but I know that this path is the one path that leaves hope for humanity. And the one thing about this that was really hard to watch is that, we've seen violence throughout the season, people getting shot all the time and all that. And there's no really finality with death because we know what the host copies and everything. We don't really feel like any character we're seeing, if they get cut down, that this is truly the last time we're going to see them. I mean, even look at Caleb. We're on the 279th version of him, according to Charlotte. But this felt different. Just the way he was shot down by William was very cold, very brutal. Just the sound of the gunshots was a lot louder than what we normally hear with the gunfights and everything, and the extensive amount of blood as he's bleeding out there, just the callousness that William did that to him with, it just felt like might be the last time we see Bernard. He shoots him in the head and tells him that it's going to be sad that you're not going to see the world to come. And then he just leaves. And we see Bernard bleeding out. And then we see what's likely the last image in his mind, that pearl mind that the hosts have of him going through that door into bliss, into the light, so to speak. And that's the last image before his circuits shut off. So, I still might feel this is a little red herring because we know how Westworld is and we know how HBO is. It's hard to imagine a final episode with no Bernard because we need some more answers. But this may be the timeline finality of this character, and what we see in episode 8 next week might just be all flashbacks. But I still feel that there's more that we're going to hear about this plan. It's like we have to, whatever this secret path that Bernard has, we have to get more clarity of that probably do flashbacks in episode 8. But that was the end of Bernard's chapter. Very sad to see our guy go down like this, but we've been seeing or hearing since episode 3 that he does have to die. So we did get that this episode. Next storyline I want to go into is Dolores. She wakes up, or Christina, and Teddy's watching over her. She's still kind of out of sorts, trying to understand that she is number one, the god of this world, and that all this chaos that she's seeing now is from her. And Teddy tells her, she's asking, where did we come from? Why are we like this? And he tells her that we are reflections of the people who made us, alluding to human beings. Just like human beings, we tend to be destructive to ourselves eventually. We're seeing that with the host. And when he's telling her all this, it's still hard for her to grasp. She leaves the room, goes into the bathroom, runs a bath, and then she starts drowning herself. And for a moment, we feel like, she's committing suicide, just like all the hosts have been doing, for the last couple of episodes. Is she trying to do the same thing? Teddy's trying to get into the bathroom. He can't get in there. And for a second, it does look like she dies. She's flailing and everything, can't get her breath. And then she's completely still. And then her eyes pop open. And her eyes pop open. It's almost like she has this epiphany of what she needs to do and who she is. So at first when this happens, I'm thinking she's completely woken up now, that by putting her body through that trauma, she remembers everything now, that this is the Dolores that we've known from the previous seasons. But it doesn't seem like that's the case because as we see, as she's going down her journey in this episode, she still doesn't remember, her past from her name. She even encounters Caleb and doesn't remember him completely. She just has like a deja vu moment and realizes he's not meant to be here, but doesn't know who he is. So that drowning didn't wake her mind up completely. I'm speculating that that moment is where she realized that she can't die, that essentially, just as Teddy says, she is a god in this world, that she is completely immortal and incapable of dying. I think that's the realization that she had, and that makes her a bit more comfortable approaching this situation, kind of knowing that she doesn't have that frailty that the other host had, that Teddy mentioned, that, we can be killed in a way. But it seems like that doesn't affect her. How does she know that she can't die? So Charlotte continues on. She feels like she has to take everything down. Everything that she started with the narratives and everything, all that has to go. So she goes back to work. She commands all the guards to go home. She commands all the workers to destroy all the narratives, completely destroy. Don't leave the building until everything is destroyed. She tells them to do that. She goes to the lower sanctums, and that's where she encounters the host of Caleb, who's locked up. She doesn't let him go. She just kind of looks at him, and Teddy tells her that's a ghost from the past, essentially saying that they don't need to waste time with this. But while all this is going on, while all the workers are destroying everything, this is when Stubbs and Frankie arrive for their mission to liberate Caleb and save Caleb. And remember, they haven't seen Caleb. So, Frankie in her mind is imagining her father older, very elderly. She's kind of afraid to go in there, but eventually she does. They're able to slip past everyone because there's no guards in there and all the workers are destroying everything. They get to the bottom level. And I had been speculating that somehow Caleb is going to be corrupted and is going to have this big fight with Frankie, and he's going to have to find his humanity in order to, fight off Charlotte's changes to his system. So that technically didn't happen. So I was pretty much completely wrong on that. What does happen is there's a brief fight with Caleb and Stubbs. He actually pushes Stubbs into his old pod and locks him in there. And he does choke Frankie briefly because he doesn't recognize her. He's still assuming that this is the little Frankie, his daughter, that he grew up with. But he soon realizes that this is Frankie grown up. She's able to tell him things about, when they spent that time in the field, when he was training her, and he realizes that this is my daughter growing up. But now Frankie is the one that's horrified because she realizes that over 20 years have passed. There's no way you can look exactly the same as you looked when I was a child. So what are you now? You're not, the father I remember. I think she has that realization that she's talking to a host. And Caleb is tearful in front of her. He says, no, 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 it's still me. I'm still in here. I'm still your father. I'm still here. Very touching, emotional moment. I felt like we had to get a little bit more because he doesn't completely explain what's been happening to him and everything. So I know, time is short. We only got less than an hour and everything. You kind of have to have a lot of this stuff off screen. But I did want a little bit more as far as him explaining to her exactly what Charlotte did and all of that. We didn't get any of that. We just kind of got that tearful, this is me, I'm still your father, a hug, and then they're trying to get out of there. So essentially, while they're trying to get out, I'm going to flip real quick to my favorite scene, which is with Ed Harris, who of course has been amazing all season. We have the final potential face-off between the human host William, who's awakened again from his slumber, with the host William, the man in black. This man in black, as we've seen, he's been teetering the last couple episodes with Charlotte's leadership and trying to find his way in the world. He's really questioning everything at this point, and that all happened since he had that encounter with the human outlier that woke up. So, before we go into that, let me preface a little bit earlier. Charlotte had her final encounter with Caleb. Caleb was banging on the doors, trying to get out. His hands were bloody, and Charlotte comes in there with William. William has a gun on him, and that prevents Caleb from attacking her. Attacking Charlotte. So Charlotte tells Caleb, you're pathetic. Look at what you're doing to your human body. You're still in this human skin. Your hands are all bruised up. Look at what you're doing to yourself. It's pathetic. And he was like, you have a lot of nerve. Your whole arm is still scarred up from that bombing that you didn't repair. So how am I pathetic? You still have the same trauma that you're carrying around. And just like we all do as human beings, you can't tell, I can tell you about yourself, but you can't tell me about myself. So Charlotte's real quick to say, well, your trauma is more pathetic than what mine is, and it's such a juvenile quip and response is very jarring coming from someone like Charlotte that's supposed to be so evolved, that's trying to build a civilization to the next evolution. For her just to kind of say that, it kind of just reminded me so much she has still to learn just about herself and just about humanity in general. Because she really had no answer to that. She's really in the same boat that Caleb is in. And if you look at it honestly, between all these characters, everybody is running through their own version of a loop or their own version of a simulation. And what that simulation is kind of replaying the trauma that leads you to act the way you are now. It's like they're replaying it in different ways and trying to get out of it, but they really don't know any way to do that. And that's why Charlotte is playing these games with the near 300th version of Caleb. And she says something, and it's very wild that she says it to Caleb before she says it to William. Or she never says it personally to William. He just overhears her. She tells Caleb that she's shutting down these cities. And this is the first inclination that we realize that this is not just one city. Essentially, probably the whole world is overrun with these type of towers. And she says that she's going to shut all that down. She's going to shut the towers down. And then at that point, we're just going to have to evolve. The humans are going to be, basically wild animals at that point. And then we as the host have to choose now. And she's really kind of taking away the choice, but she's really saying that we as the host have to evolve to that next plane of existence that she's been trying to push for. And she even thinks that the people in Sublime will come out and join her. So who does she sound like talking like this? She sounds completely like a cult leader. If I'm showing my age a little bit, but if you remember Heaven's Gate in the 90s, David Koresh with the Branch Davidians. You want to go back even further before my time and look at Jim Jones, is the exact same type of speech she gives before she shuts the tower down when she's talking with the host over the loudspeaker that goes throughout the city that, you'll understand in time. It's time for us to evolve. It's time for us to rise above and get to that next plane of existence and leave these trappings of our bodies. Complete batshit insane cult leader talk. She sounds just like Jim Jones. As far as smart as she is and everything, she's devolving in a sense. She's panicking because, William asks her, are you really going to do this? And she says, yes. She says, in the last 3 days, we've had more hosts commit suicide than we've had in the last 2 to 3 decades. So she feels the walls closing in, and she feels this is her only out, just to burn everything down, for this quasi belief that we're going to evolve and be, in the clouds, so to speak, like angels. Complete cult leader talk, complete narcissism. And we see the narcissism on William's side because he doesn't want this to happen, because she's like, say goodbye to your human pets and everything that you're running in the city and be ready to evolve. And you can see on his face, he wants no parts of that. He's enjoying his little fiefdom, that he's been able to achieve. And that's what makes him go down and have the confrontation with William, the human William, because he's going there and he's like, he's still looking for answers. And the human William, classic original Man in Black, is like, would you just cut the meandering questions and the seeking of who I am and all that? It does not matter. He says the only thing that really matters is survival. That's it. Culture doesn't survive, cockroaches do. So he's basically saying that we can lie to ourselves, that we're so evolved, we can create religion and ethics and all of that stuff to kind of dress up the fact that we are just animals that are trying to survive. That is essentially what he tells them. He's like, as soon as you realize that and stop looking for this higher calling, you can do what you need to do. Now, if you can't do that, maybe you want to break me out and I can do it for you. But at this point, it doesn't matter because the reason that you're down here is because my DNA is inside you. And if you are truly the host version of me, you know what needs to be done. And it's funny because this shows the danger of the host interacting with human beings. So far, we've had the host, when they interact with an outlier, the outliers have been peaceful. They've just been wanting answers, and that's been causing confusion in the host and despair. But this version kind of awakes the dark side and the murderous side of human beings, which is what William encompasses. So in that split second with that conversation, the host version of William turns on a dime and he is essentially now a mirror reflection of the human William, and he knows exactly what he needs to do. Now, what he does is he kills the host version, stabs him directly through the heart. It kind of goes back to that old Zen saying of, if you ever come across Buddha in the street, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to kill him. And essentially, the reason behind that, and there's been so many theories behind that, but I'll just stick with one of the main ones I've heard, is that the Buddha is really in yourself, that anything outside of yourself that you're looking for answers for, any type of religion or spiritual way of thought, it all exists in you. So anything outside of you needs to be destroyed because you don't need to be looking outside of yourself. You need to be looking inward for the answers. So he essentially kills his teacher or the one that's outside of himself because he doesn't need the human William anymore because he knows what needs to be done. And the best scene of that episode to me, of this episode, is when he kills him and when he walks away, the human William, as he's tied up, hands outstretched, almost Christ-like, his head sags and he's dying, his breath is leaving him, and he gives a little wry smile because he's like, that's my boy. I taught him well, even though it was just a couple minutes and a couple lines. He got everything he needs to make this world in my image. And he smiles that little, devilish William smile and he dies. So now we have the host version of William that's fully empowered and fully independent now. So my first thing is I want to see him. We didn't get to see Clementine, but I love her, and I know that she's William's right hand man, or woman, excuse me. So now that he has this mission, once he talks with Clementine about what she needs to do, that's going to be a formidable duo. But now that he knows what he needs to do, This is the reason why earlier he killed Bernard. He brings down the tower, and then he also involves himself in the big battle, the big face-off that we've been waiting all season for between Maeve and Charlotte. Love the way that was shot. One thing I want to say about Charlotte I didn't mention earlier, she looks fantastic in red. I would say we probably needed to see her in red the whole season, but it was very deliberate with this episode because, of course, now she's passionate. She's kind of unhinged to a degree. She's completely in her feelings, and that's, encapsulated by the fact that she's wearing red. I think that was the deliberate reason why she's in that color this time around. Before she was mostly in white, mostly devoid of emotion, very sterile, but now she's more in her feelings at this point. We've seen, subtle hints of that in earlier episodes with her flashing her anger and everything, but now it's complete at this point. So when she has this face off with Maeve, Maeve is telling her that you're really the most pathetic one. You're really the one that is looking for meaning that really can't exist outside of the petty human emotions that you think you're above. That's really defining everything that you're trying to do, destroy the world that you created, trying to evolve to that next step, but you're doing it by yourself because everybody that you think you're saving, they're not here with you. You're going to that next plane of trying to evolve by yourself. You have no one at your side at this point. You're completely alone. And, Charlotte doesn't really have an answer to that. She just says, well, you're going to save me. Well, how are you going to do that? And here's when she says one of my favorite other lines that she has a knife out because we're going to get a knife fight because, that intimate type of violence and hand-to-hand combat is a lot more compelling than a shootout. But as Maeve is holding that knife, she says, how about I cut you loose, meaning cut you loose from your human your humanity, so to speak, that's been holding you down. So they get right into it, get right into a fight, going back and forth, a lot of heavy action, throwing each other through walls and everything. We're getting to see kind of uh the full spectrum of their power, so to speak, as far as their physical strength. So they go right through a wall and they're fighting out in one of the waterways, so to speak. So they're both fighting and all that. And there's one cheap moment that happens when Maeve has the upper hand and looks like she's about to deliver a death blow. One of the henchmen, the muscle suit guys, comes out of nowhere and knocks Maeve away. Now you know how slow these things are, and they're out in the middle of the waterway or water fountain fighting. So the muscle suit guy would have had to have gotten in there undetected and then hit her. And they move super slow. So the fact that he came out of nowhere and popped her like that was a little annoying. But Maeve disposes of him very quickly, and then it's back to a one-on-one fight. And it's still pretty even. They're both knocking each other around. No one has the advantage. There's no guns. So it's completely hand to hand at this point. They both lose their knives. And then they have a face off and they have a little bit more conversation. And essentially, Charlotte is like, you're not going to win. You really thought you were going to win. Why are you here? And Maeve is like, we didn't come here to win. We came here to survive. And kind of mirroring what William said earlier, where it's all about survival, but this is the other side of the coin, trying to survive because you want to have hope for the future. No matter how bleak it looks, as long as we survive, there's a possibility that we can rebuild the world or create a new world. Even if I don't survive personally, if someone on my team survived, my kin, whatever, what have you, as long as someone is alive, there's always hope for a better tomorrow. That's kind of the flowery good side of it. That's what Maeve is talking about, as opposed to William is just like it's survival of the fittest. Whoever can is the strongest and most domineering, the biggest tyrant, that's the one that deserves to live. So Maeve is showing the other version of that. But while she's doing that, she gets cut down again, just like Bernard did, brutal headshot from William, who comes out of nowhere. And Charlotte is still thinking she has this man in her back pocket. She says, it took you long enough. Glad we got that out the way. But she realizes quickly that William is not here to take any orders from her. He's completely liberated and tells her point blank, now we play the game my way. And she has one question, well, what do you mean by that? And he says survival of the fittest and gives her a headshot. So we get a morbid but a beautiful shot of both Maeve and Charlotte just floating in the fountain, with headshots, completely removed now. Now it's all William. Apparently the biggest obstacles for him taking over have been removed. And this is the William now that we remember from the earlier seasons. He has his hat on, complete man in black mode. And one of the best things about that ending scene where he's walking towards the tower that's now fallen, the soundtrack we get is David Bowie's "The Man Who Sold the World." That song, my generation kind of remembers that from Nirvana Unplugged, Kurt Cobain's version of that. But perfect segue because he's basically sold out this version of the world just to create hell on earth. And that goes back to John Milton. I'm an English major, so Paradise Lost, better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. And that's what William wants. I thought all this was going to happen the next season, because remember I mentioned before, I thought the season was going to end with Charlotte going down and the human version of William somehow gaining control of the corporation and all that, and him being the big villain of season 5. But the writers of this season were like, damn that, we're ending the season with William just causing chaos. So I was completely off about that. They were a couple steps ahead of me. We're essentially going to get our last episode with William having just scorched earth, just created complete chaos. And it seems like the only people that are going to be able to oppose him are going to be Dolores and Teddy. And on the human side, it's going to be Stubbs, Frankie, and Caleb going against William. So this is going to be very, very interesting because it's going to feel like the only thing that could potentially stop him will be uh, human beings, so to speak. The one thing that he can't somewhat calculate for, but there's a big power vacuum there because William is now completely unhinged. So I think you really need Dolores to figure out a way to kind of incorporate herself in that and to help the human beings. But there's a big question now of how she's going to do that because we find out when the tower goes down, and all this chaos has started because without the tower, the host and the human beings, they don't have any direction now, and they're just fighting each other. They're fights to the death out in the street between them. And you're thinking survival of the fittest is going to be the host because they're stronger, but we don't necessarily know that, because, they're completely unhinged now. And we know when they come in contact with human beings, it makes them suicidal. So it's hard to think anyone is going to survive. But the main thing we learn is that now that the tower is down, Dolores is trying to tell everybody to stop, but she has no control over the host anymore. And she's trying to figure out why. And Teddy tells her it's because they can't see you anymore. And we get a big bombshell. He tells her, you're not real in this world. So essentially, that tower was keeping this version of her, this permutation alive, in this world where she was able to create these narratives and everything and have this power. All that is gone now that the tower is down. But she's still walking around, so to speak. So now the question is, if she doesn't exist in this world, where does she exist? Is she already in the sublime and doesn't know it? Because remember that, Supreme Being in the sublime was telling Bernard that everyone else isn't here because they're exploring other worlds and other realities in their own mind. So if is that what's going on? Is this some type of complete overarching reality just in Dolores's mind, so to speak? Or is she just not here completely? Is she just in some other place, isolated that we haven't heard of yet? So we're going to need answers on that because I am really not sure where she's at. We just know that she's not here completely, and she's going to have to get here in some form or fashion if she's going to save the world. And that's how the episode ends. So this was a very good setup one. I don't have any complaints, besides what I mentioned about the Maeve and Charlotte fight. And I wanted a bit longer scene with Caleb and Frankie when they reunited, as far as a little bit him giving her a little bit more backstory on what was going on and maybe some insight on how they could win this. So I think we're going to get some heavy flashbacks for the first probably 15 minutes or so of episode 8 to kind of flesh everything out, particularly with Bernard as far as that path that he knows. It's kind of hard for me to believe we've seen the last of Charlotte and Maeve. I feel like at least on Charlotte's end, she would have made another copy of herself because, essentially when the man in black went rogue, it would be hard for me to imagine, as powerful as Charlotte is, her not sensing that. she's already didn't sense him having these questions, but it was apparent on his face that he wasn't with her plan of bringing down the tower. So I feel like, she has to have some fail safe in place where she has at least some other copies of herself, some other where. I can't just see this being the end of her and Maeve, especially for the last episode. So let me know what you guys think. Overall, I like this one. Not my favorite of the season, but very well planned out. We have a lot of irons in the fire that need to be resolved in episode 8. So I'm sticking with my guns as far as believing that this episode needs to be an hour 15, maybe even an hour and a half to flesh everything out, to finally get some closure with Dolores' story and also where the man in black is going to go. Is he only going to have one episode of complete dominance and then gets taken down? Or does he somehow survive, Frankie and Caleb and everyone coming after him, and then he's still the big bad guy for season 5, if we get to season 5? Because I can see a pathway where they close everything up and there's complete closure and there's no need for a quote unquote season 5. So let me know what you guys think. Once again, this video goes kind of long because there's so much to talk about with Westworld. I think I've covered everything. One thing we have to keep in mind that Teddy did tell Dolores was that the older version of her, could be cruel because she had to meet cruelty with cruelty because she endured so much cruelty. And I feel like she's going to have to tap into that if she plans to go against William in the last episode. It can't be this passive version that we've been seeing. She has to return to the old version that we've seen before. So let me know what you guys think. This was episode 7, Metanoia, a little bit of deeper meaning. We've seen all the characters kind of trapped in their own loops, in their own trauma, trying to make peace and repentance with that to go to that higher plane. Nobody was really successful except for William, which is depressing in a sense, but makes for good TV. It's always fun seeing the bad guy kind of win, especially when he has a good case of why he's right. You know, when you think about it, maybe we're no more than cockroaches, and maybe civilization is a lie to a degree that we tell ourselves. But it makes for a dangerous, very compelling villain. And we're gonna have to see. I was saying before that it seems like Charlotte uh being able to stop her seemed almost impossible, but a completely unhinged William with the human mind and the host body, he's going to be rough because he has nothing to lose. He's not doesn't have any inhibitions about destroying anyone. It's all survival of the fittest now. So let me know what you guys think. This was episode 7, and looking forward to seeing you guys next week for the final episode, episode 8. So take care and talk to you guys soon.